The night the killing was decided, a 19-year-old queen sat on a wooden chest in her mother's bedroom. And nobody would tell her why her sister was crying. She wrote the scene down herself years later. It's the night of August 23rd, 1572, inside the Louvre. Her sister grabs her hand in tears. "For the love of God, do not stir out of this chamber." Her mother overrules it. "Go to bed." So the girl walks out, more dead than alive. Her words. 5 days earlier, she got married on a stage in front of thousands. Within hours of her leaving this room, her wedding guests will start to die. Thousands will follow, and the bride has been told nothing at all. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what was decided in that room. She never did, not until it was over. Her name is Marguerite de Valois. Paris calls her Margot. Her mother is Catherine de Medici, the most powerful woman in France. And if you know Catherine at all, you know the reputation. The poisoner, the schemer, the mother who sold her children to keep a throne. So what did Catherine actually trade her daughter for? And did she know the price when she signed? We'll follow the deal that put a Catholic princess in a Protestant marriage. The 6 days between the vows and the massacre, and the long revenge of the bride. Before sunrise, a stranger will be bleeding on her bed, and the marriage built to end a war will end something much closer to home. Because most of what survives about women like her is someone else's edit. This is the rare case where she left her own. We'll be reading from it. It starts with the mother at her desk. Catherine married off her children the way a records office keeps a registry. 1 entry per child, 1 alliance per entry. You've signed forms that decided less about your life than 1 line in that book decided about theirs. In 1559, she filed her oldest girl, Elizabeth, 14 years old, to the King of Spain. Same year, Claude, 11, went to the Duke of Lorraine. Elizabeth crossed the border at 14 and was dead at 23. The registry didn't pause. Every royal family in Europe kept one. Catherine's just went further, because the last daughter was about to be married across the front line of a civil war. By 1570, France had burned through 3 civil wars in 8 years. Catholics on one side, French Protestants, the Huguenots, on the other. Neighbor against neighbor. Your street, your church, your side. In August 1570, they signed a peace. 3 names sat under it: King Charles IX, Admiral Coligny, the Huguenots' commander, and Jeanne d'Albret, the Protestant Queen of Navarre. Within 2 years, one of them was dead, one was murdered, and one had signed the order. The peace was barely holding. So Catherine reached for the tool she trusted most. 1 daughter left, Marguerite, born in 1553, 7th child, 3rd girl, the last unmarried entry in the registry. Catholic, 19, the king's own sister. And the groom Catherine picked? Henri de Navarre, royal blood, after her own sons, literally the next in line for the throne, and a Huguenot, the other side of the war. 1 wedding to glue together 2 faiths that had spent 10 years killing each other. Nobody asked the bride. Marguerite had come to court in 1569, and she'd already fallen for someone. The young Duke of Guise, the star of the hard Catholic party. It went nowhere. Instead, she got handed to the enemy's side of the war. The groom's mother fought it. Jeanne held out for months before she signed the contract in April 1572. Then in June, 2 months before the wedding, she died in Paris. Her doctors found disease. The Huguenot street told a different story. Poisoned gloves, sent by Catherine. The gloves are a legend. Paris repeated it anyway. Before a single vow was spoken, half the city already believed the mother of the bride could kill, and the rumor was not the worst thing waiting for this wedding. In July, the groom rode into Paris with 800 gentlemen, all of them dressed in mourning black. Paris watched them pass in silence. If that image makes you uneasy, it should. The harvest had failed that year. Bread was short, taxes were up. And the court threw the most expensive wedding anyone had ever seen. One more problem sat in Rome. A Catholic princess can't marry a Protestant without the Pope's permission, and the Pope said no. King Charles got tired of waiting. The wedding would happen without Rome's paper. And this is a story where paper outlasts people. 27 years from now, paper ends this marriage. Paper gets the last word, too. So, on August 18th, 1572, a raised walkway ran from the bishop's palace to the doors of Notre Dame, covered in cloth of gold. The groom was Protestant, so the vows happened outside at the church door in the open air. Below, the crowd stood packed together, stifling in the heat. People whose preachers had spent weeks teaching them to hate the groom. Hungry people, watching gold. Marguerite walked that platform in a crown and a royal gown of ermine, blazing her word in diamonds. A blue robe with a train 15 feet long. 3 princesses carried it. At the church door, a cardinal put the question, and 50 years later, a historian wrote that she never answered, that her brother the king pushed her head down into a nod, and that the nod was counted as a yes. Her own memoirs never mention it. Dumas put it in a novel, and that became the famous version. What she does write down is quieter. The Huguenots didn't trust her because she was Catholic. The Catholics didn't trust her because of the man she'd just married. And no one, her word, spoke a syllable of the matter to her. After the vows, Henri walked his bride to the door of the choir and stopped. He would not go to Mass. His wife heard it without him. 4 days of parties. Then, on August 22nd, a wedding guest got shot in the street. Admiral Coligny. The man the whole piece was built around. He lodged near the Louvre, with guards on the door day and night. That Friday, he was out in the street, reading a letter as he walked. A gun fired from a window. The shot smashed his hand and tore up his arm. He lived. His men rushed him inside, and the Huguenot lords who had come for a wedding gathered around his bed. That same afternoon, the king himself came to the sickbed. He stood over the wounded admiral and promised again and again to find the shooter and punish him. The room didn't believe him. The room was angry, armed, and talking about revenge. So Charles ordered an investigation, the one thing certain people at court could not afford. So who paid for that shot? That same week, Venice's ambassador in Paris sat writing his report home. All of it planned, he said. The wedding as bait, the guests as targets, Catherine as the author. His letters crossed Europe within weeks, and that version has run for 4.5 centuries. You've heard it, even if you don't know where from. Much later, a French historian went back through Catherine's own letters, and she found 2 years of work sunk into this piece. No order, no plan, no trap. We'll never know for certain who paid for that gun, but what the record does show, hour by hour, is what the Crown decided next. On the night of August 23rd, in Catherine's rooms, the king met his mother and the Catholic princes. The argument on the table, the Huguenot chiefs were about to rise and take power. Marguerite's memoirs give you the outcome in one line. That night, The massacre was resolved upon. The targets were the Huguenot leaders, the wedding guests. And the plan was to strike first. How many people that decision killed, nobody wrote down that night. One piece of paper answers it anyway. We'll read it when the night is over. Down the corridor, on the wooden chest, sat the one person being kept out of it. At this point in the night, you know more about her marriage than she does. Her sister said it out loud. Marguerite was being sent away to be sacrificed. If anything went wrong, she'd be the first victim. Catherine snapped at her to be silent. Then she gave the reason. The girl had to go. Because if she stayed, the Huguenots might suspect. Her daughter's ignorance was part of the plan. In her rooms, Marguerite dropped to her knees and prayed to God to save her. From what, she had no idea. Then her husband sent for her. She went in knowing nothing. The bedroom was packed, 30 or 40 Huguenot gentlemen around the bed, strangers to her, talking all night about the admiral and justice. She lay awake in the middle of them. Watch what the city does that night. Chains go up across the streets. Alarm bells get manned. Armed men move to their posts, each man following the orders he'd been given. White crosses get pinned to hats so the killers can tell each other apart in the dark. Barriers, posts, written orders, badges, the same machinery a city uses to run a royal wedding, now running in reverse. A city can organize a massacre the same way it organizes a parade. The gates of Paris were locked. Boats were chained up along the river. Nobody was leaving. At first light, armed men reached Coligny's lodging. A soldier forced the bedroom, killed the wounded admiral in his bed, and threw the body out the window into the courtyard. In the street, the crowd took over what was left of him. And the bells began. At dawn, Henri got up and announced he'd go play tennis until the king woke, then demand justice. On the morning of the massacre, the King of Navarre headed for a tennis court. That detail survives because his wife wrote it down. You'd never dare invent it. His gentlemen followed him out. Many of them were dead by nightfall. Marguerite, exhausted, finally slept. An hour later, someone was beating her door with hands and feet, screaming, "Navarre! Navarre!" Her nurse thought it was the king, her husband. She opened it. A man she had never seen crashed in and threw himself onto her bed. Blood on his arm from a sword cut, a pike wound next to it. 4 soldiers came through the door after him. She jumped out of the bed. He came with her, holding onto her waist, both of them screaming. Strangers equally terrified. And into this walked the captain of the guard, a bleeding stranger, clinging to the Queen of Navarre in her nightdress. He could barely keep from laughing. She writes that down, too. She asked him for the man's life. He gave it. She hid the stranger in her closet and had his wounds dressed until he recovered. Then she changed her nightdress, because it was soaked with his blood. The captain threw a cloak over her and walked her toward her sister's rooms. In the antechamber, every door standing open, a man was run through with a pike right in front of her. He fell dead at her feet. She fainted into the captain's arms. When she came to, 2 men from her husband's household found her and begged for their lives. She went to the king, then to her mother, got on her knees, and got both men spared. She knew nothing. She had nothing. And she still talked 3 men out of dying before most of Paris ate breakfast. Outside the palace, nobody was kneeling for anyone. The crowd took the killings at the top as permission. House to house, street to street. Huguenots, and people who might be Huguenots, killed where they were found, their homes stripped. Neighbors pointed out neighbors. Heirs pointed at rich relatives. The king ordered the killing to stop. The killing did not stop. It ran for days through his own capital. A crown that could organize 1,000 killers overnight could not call them off. And that's the part that should scare you. Nobody counted the dead. Somebody counted the cost. This is the piece of paper we promised you. In the city's account books, there's a payment to workmen. The job, collecting and burying 1,100 bodies that the river had carried downstream and left on its banks. 1 week's worth. One copy of the record even names the price, 35 livres, paid to the gravediggers. Gravedigger money. That's what the deadliest week of the century cost the city of Paris on paper. 1,100, 1 week, 1 river. From receipts like that one, historians count 2,000 to 3,000 dead in Paris. Then Lyon, Rouen, Bordeaux, and Toulouse ran their own versions through the autumn. Across the kingdom, 5,000 to 10,000, and beyond. That is how you count a massacre nobody counted. And here's the part that stays with you. 4.5 centuries later, when a historian gives you a death toll for that week, you are reading a receipt. Rome didn't reach for a receipt. The Pope ordered a Thanksgiving service. Then he struck a medal. An angel with a cross and a sword, standing over the fallen. The inscription in Latin, the slaughter of the Huguenots. The medal sits in museums today. You can still see it. And in the Louvre, Catherine had one more question for her daughter. 5 or 6 days after the massacre, she counted, Catherine stopped her on the way to chapel. She put her daughter on oath. Was her husband capable as a man? Because, said the Queen Mother, if he is not, I can easily procure you a divorce. There's the exit, the trade reversed, the goods returned, the daughter free for a safer match. After the platform, the blood-soaked nightdress, the man dead at her feet, the whole marriage could simply be undone. Marguerite said no. I am content to remain as I am. Years later, she wrote down why. She suspected the offer. The plotters, she says, knew that nobody could touch her husband while she was still his wife. Henri had survived that night by converting with a knife at his back. Now he lived at court, basically a prisoner. Her marriage, the deal she was never asked about, was the one legal fact standing between him and a blade. She was 19. She was being offered the one thing a traded daughter almost never gets, the trade undone, offered by the one person with the power to grant it. And she said no, to protect a husband she barely knew, from the family she knew all too well. She stayed a tool of her mother's politics, just pointed the other way now. That refusal bought Henri 3.5 years. He spent them at court under watch, playing the loyal convert for the family that had killed his friends. His wife had stood on a platform for this alliance. Now she lived inside its wreckage, beside him. In 1576, he escaped. He rode south, took back his faith, took back his army. The marriage he left behind turned into a ceasefire. Marguerite got passed between 2 courts that both used her and neither trusted her. In 1585, she picked a side, gambled, and lost. From 1586, she was held at a castle called Usen on a rock in the mountains. Officially, her residence. Really, her prison for 18 years. Catherine cut her out of the will and never spoke to her again. And at Usen, on that rock, Marguerite picked up a pen. By the 1590s, whole libraries existed about her family. Official statements, attack pamphlets, ambassadors' reports, and almost none of it was hers. Print had already turned her into a cartoon villain. Everyone who needed a wicked queen used her name. If you've ever had your story told for you by people who never asked you, that, at the scale of a kingdom, is what she was up against. She answered with a manuscript. Written in exile, addressed to an old friend, her memoirs walked back through all of it. The childhood, the wedding, and that night, room by room, the chest, the tears, the banging on the door, the laughing captain, the blood-soaked nightdress. Kings issued statements, ambassadors filed reports. Nobody else from the royal family ever wrote what that night was like from the inside. The ambassador gave Europe the plot. The historian gave it the pushed head. Dumas gave it a novel, and the movies followed the novel. But whenever the story steps inside the palace on that night, it stands on one manuscript. Hers. When a modern history takes you inside the Louvre in the dark, you're inside her paragraphs. One deal was left. Henri became King of France in 1589. He needed an heir she had never given him. That meant ending the marriage, and that meant her signature. She signed away the marriage she had once refused to give up because the man it shielded didn't need a shield anymore. He needed a son, so she named her price, item by item. Debts paid, an income, and the right to keep calling herself queen. At the hearings, witnesses lined up to swear she'd been forced into the marriage by her mother and her brother. The pushed head, the stolen nod, the story the whole century already believed. Her own memoirs are quieter and stranger than that. It didn't matter. In 1599, the Pope dissolved the marriage. There it is, the paper we told you about, arriving 27 years late, on her terms. In 1572, the story of her consent was invented for other people's purposes. In 1599, the story of her coercion worked for hers. She came back to Paris in 1605, kept a house full of writers and scholars, and stayed on warm terms with the ex-husband she had once shielded. And then the family register closes, entry by entry. The wedding was built to end a war. The war ran on for another 26 years. What actually ended was the family that threw it. Charles, the brother king who signed off on the massacre. It was said to haunt him for the rest of his short life. He grew dark, then sick, and died in 1574, 23 years old. Catherine, gone in 1589, everything she'd built in ruins. The last brother, assassinated months later. And with him, the House of Valois ended. 3 brothers had worn the crown. None left a son to follow. The registry their mother kept had no entries left to make. Except it hadn't quite ended. One Valois was still alive, on her rock in the mountains, writing. Henri, the husband, stabbed to death in a Paris street in 1610. She outlived him, too. Marguerite de Valois died in 1615, the last of her entire dynasty. And the only one who left the inside of that August night on paper. Her memoirs came out in 1628, 13 years after her own death, when everyone in them was gone. The mother, the brothers, the husband. The girl on the wooden chest outlived every person who had kept her in the dark, every single one. 4 centuries of historians, novelists, and filmmakers have told the story of that night. And every one of them, to get inside the Louvre, has had to pass through her bedroom door and borrow her eyes. 4.5 centuries of retellings, and the way in is still a 19-year-old's bedroom. Catherine de Medici spent a lifetime trading children for a secure throne, and the throne died with her sons. Catherine sold her daughter for a peace that lasted 6 days. The daughter owned the story for 4 centuries,